You know, most of us think we're pretty reasonable. We're pretty rational. We're pretty logical. That when we're faced with a question or a decision that needs to be made, that in and of ourselves, we're rational beings. But the reality is, humanity is much more emotionally driven and desires driven than we'd like to think. The way that we process things, the way that we make decisions, the way that we set up our lives and pursue different things, it's less rational and it's more emotional than we'd really like to believe. And the enemy knows this. Now, even as believers, we think that we are fairly objective when it comes to the lies of this world. We think we can see them for what they are, that we can stay set apart or stay grounded, and that we're not affected by this world outside and the systems of this world and the ideas of this world. But in reality, I think we're more affected by the ideas in this world than we'd like to think we are. In Colossians chapter 2, verse 6, Paul writes, "And you, therefore, having received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him, rooted and built up in him and established in the faith as you have been taught, abounding in it with thanksgiving." Paul says, stay rooted in Christ. Now that sounds super spiritual, but what does it actually mean? What does it mean to stay rooted and planted in the person of Jesus Christ? Or when Paul says, fix your eyes on Christ, the author and the finisher of your faith, what does it mean to keep our eyes locked on him? Well, then he goes on in Colossians 2, verse 8, he says, beware, lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the traditions of men, according to the basic principles of the world, and not according to Christ. For in him dwells all the fullness of the Godhead bodily, and you are complete in him who is the head of all principality and power. Stay rooted in him. But beware of the philosophies of this world, the empty teachings of this world, the traditions of men, because that will uproot you. That will cause you to take your eyes off of him. And I know what a lot of us think. Yeah, sex, drugs, rock and roll. Stay away from those things. But Satan is so much more subtle than that in the life of a believer. Guys, the battleground is not with flesh and blood, is it? It's a battle of ideas. That's what this world faces. It's the battle between truth and lies. That's where Satan operates. When Satan came against Eve, did he come with a sword? Did he come with a stick? Did he come with a weapon? Or did he come with a lie? When Satan tempted Jesus in the desert, did he come with a weapon or did he come with an idea? I will give you rule over all of these nations if you will bow down to me. And how did Jesus do battle with Satan? With the word of God, with truth. That's where the battle lies, with ideas, thoughts. You know, the world's aware of this. Especially marketing firms. They're well aware of this. I learned the other day that there was a time when the tobacco industry was facing a really difficult challenge. Women weren't smoking. So they had to figure out how to target women. So they hired a media firm that happened to be headed up by Sigmund Freud's nephew. He was a man that had been involved in, before he got into marketing, he had been involved in military propaganda. Because militaries all over the world know this as well, that the battle starts with ideas and not on the ground and not with troops. It starts with shaping people's perceptions, and unfortunately our perceptions are very easily shaped because we're emotional beings. Well, after he left the propaganda field, he went into marketing, which is another form of propaganda. And the first thing he did was he worked with directors in Hollywood. And he started getting the attractive women to smoke in their movies. And then he had these directors from Hollywood place these women in scenes that right after there was lovemaking, they would never show it back then. This was in the 30s. But they insinuated that a man and a woman slept together. And right after they slept together, what would you see that woman doing? Smoking. So there's this Pavlovian response. You know what the Pavlovian dogs, that whole idea where the scientists would feed the dog, ring a bell, feed the dog, ring a bell, feed the dog, ring a bell. And then they wouldn't feed the dog, but they would ring the bell and the dog would salivate. The same thing happened with smoking. We would attach our desire for sex to smoking, and it worked. They captured that market of women by purely attaching smoking to one of our most primal desires. And we think that, wow, what a crafty man he was. Well, I don't think he was working under his own authority. But that's just a small picture of how the enemy works. And it's the same way he's working today. Through social media, through regular media, through just thoughts and ideas and podcasts and blogs. And that's why Jesus came as a teacher. Not as a soldier, not as a general, not as a warrior, but as a teacher. Because he knew the battle was for ideas. The battle was for truth. That's why he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Now, as we've been studying the Gospels in chronological order, we have really dispelled this lie that Jesus was just a timid, passive, holy man who just wandered around quietly whispering words of wisdom to anyone who was listening closely enough to his words. You know, this idea that Jesus was a gentle man who fed the hungry and healed the sick and loved the lost, and that's it. He didn't want to offend anyone. He just wanted to be Mother Teresa before Mother Teresa ever existed. We know that that's just not the case. Because if that was the case, it would make his crucifixion a curious thing. Here's a man who healed the blind, fed the hungry, loved the lost, and they killed him for it. But as we've been closely examining the Gospels, we've gotten a clearer picture of Jesus of Nazareth, haven't we? He was radical. Now, I know that word radical, we like to toss that around when we talk about Jesus nowadays because it's kind of edgy. Jesus was radical. It grabs people's attention. But whether you like that description of Jesus or not, it's entirely accurate. The definition of radical means very different from the usual or traditional, favoring extreme changes in existing views, habits, conditions, or institutions. From a political standpoint, radical means advocating extreme measures to retain or restore a political state of affairs, where we get the term radical right or radical left. Now, keep in mind, Jesus didn't suffer a criminal's death because he fed the hungry and he healed the sick and he loved the lost. Jesus was crucified because his teachings were radical. They were offensive. They flipped the systems of the world upside down. See, when you call the people in power, when you call the religious elite, the religious leaders, those who have a great deal of power and influence, things like blind guides and fools and whitewashed tombs filled with dead men's bones, when you call these men serpents, brood of vipers, hypocrites, unmarked, this is a good one, this one's one of my favorites, unmarked graves that people trample on and they don't even notice. When you call these men sons of the devil, you're going to catch their attention. And guys, Jesus wasn't just being offensive for offensive's sake. You know, my kids, they know how to do that. They know how to offend one another just for the sake of bugging one another. They know what to say to make the other person mad. But that's not what Jesus was doing at all. His words were rooted in love. See, false teaching and false religion, they were leading men and women to hell. The Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes, they were perpetuating a lie that a man or a woman could be made right with God through their own good works. It was self-righteousness. And the most loving thing Jesus could do was to expose this system of damning self-righteousness. It was a system that Jesus said was scattering people from God, sending them away from God instead of gathering men and women to God. That's why Jesus was crucified. In John 3:17, we read, "For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. He who believes in him is not condemned, but he who believes not, but he who does not believe is condemned already." Why didn't people believe? Because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son. And this is the condemnation, that the light has come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone practicing evil hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. But he who does the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be clearly seen, that they have been done in God. See, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, they loved the darkness because it is in the darkness that they got their power and their influence and their renown. They loved their lifestyle. And when Jesus came, he exposed it. He shined a light on it. And they hated him for it. See, in a culture of lies, the truth is radical. In a world of lies, the truth is radical. It is the extreme. And some will rejoice in the truth, but many others will despise it. And that's what leads us in to Matthew chapter 12, verse 46. Because as we look at these verses, they seem a little less offensive than what we've been studying. They seem a little more benign, if you will. Jesus seems to tone things down a little bit and take on more of that Mother Teresa persona that many more people are comfortable with. That kumbaya persona. But I'm going to argue this morning that what we read is probably one of the most radical things that Jesus said. It's one of the most offensive things that Jesus ever taught. And it's not just offensive to the people of his time, it's offensive to our generation. So let's take a look. Matthew 12, verse 46. While he was still talking to the multitudes, behold, his mother and brothers stood outside, seeking to speak with him. Then one said to him, "Look, your mother and your brothers are standing outside, seeking to speak with you." But Jesus answered and said to the one who told him, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" And he stretched out his hand toward his disciples and said, "Here are my brothers and my mother. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my mother, is my brother and sister and mother." Now, does Jesus not know who his mother and brothers are? No, Jesus is well aware that Mary is his mother and his brothers are James and Jude, correct? So what is going on here? Now, we read this and think that Jesus is calling us his brothers and sisters, right? That Jesus is our brother. How sweet is that? That we're a part of Jesus' family. But we don't quite understand, because of the world we live in and our cultural values today, how offensive this would have come off. We hear Jesus' words through ears that have been born and raised in a hyper-individualistic society where we celebrate me and mine. I was watching a credit card commercial. And in this commercial, they took the song, "He's got the whole world in his hands." You guys know that song, right? He's got the whole world in his hands. And they changed the words to "I've got the whole world in my hands." I've got the whole world. It's the first time, we understand the systems of this world. It's the first time I've heard a worship song used for children changed to serve self. But it's kind of a picture of the world that we live in today. We celebrate the individual. We're part of a culture that prioritizes the needs of the one over the needs of the group. It's an individualistic mindset that's had a dramatic impact on families, on churches, and on our culture as a whole. And we need to understand that because of that perspective, we're missing how radical Jesus' teaching is here. Because in Jesus' time, and really in most of the world today, the needs of the group, the needs of the family, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the individual. It is a very Western idea to celebrate the needs of self over the needs of the group. What does that mean? Well, put simply, in Jesus' time, family was everything. Your family meant everything. Most marriages were arranged based on the needs of that family. You weren't getting married because you needed your individual needs met. You were getting married because it benefited your whole entire family. As one historian writes, it was not merely the individuals who were married. The two families came together in mutual support. Beauty and romance, while considered pleasant things, they were noted to be passing. Life and survival had to be based on far sturdier foundations. So marriage was more about survival of the family than it was about the individuals. And that's just one example. One of the worst things you could do to your family was bring dishonor to your family name. Even in some Orthodox Jewish circles today, if you convert to Christianity, they'll hold a funeral for you. You're no longer alive to them. You're dead to your family. And we've all heard horrific stories about young girls offending their fathers, offending the family name, and the fathers taking their lives. We've heard those stories in the news. It's because the family was much more important than the individual. Your identity within your family was much more important than your identity as an individual. Add to this, now think about this for a second. We saw this a little bit when Jesus healed or raised from the dead that widow's son. As the oldest son, you had the primary responsibility of taking care of your parents in their old age. It was your responsibility. And if your mom became a widow, even more so. And it's with that in mind that Jesus says, "Who is my mother? Who are my brothers? These men, these women, my disciples." He's speaking to his inner circle now. The crowds are listening, but he's pointing to his inner circle. He says, "These are my brothers. These are my sisters." That would have been mind-blowing for the crowds. How dare you? How dare you substitute these people for your real blood relatives. But that's not the only radical thing Jesus said about family, is it? In Luke 14:25, we read, "Now great multitudes went with him. And he turned and he said to them, 'If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. He cannot follow me.'" I have yet to hear that quoted in a Focus on the Family article. What is Jesus saying here? Many of you have studied this passage. You know that Jesus is being controversial for a reason. He's coming straight at his culture. He's coming straight at the systems of thought and the ideas that permeate their minds, that control their minds. And he's saying, if you value family over me, if I am not the preeminent relationship in your life, you cannot follow me. Because as soon as mom or dad says, hey, you need to do this, and it's contrary to where I'm leading you, you're going to follow their direction. As soon as the will of the family is put at odds with my will, you will follow the will of the family. And if your families are not believers, and I'm telling you to go to a place that they're not going, are you going to follow me? Now, I will say this. If that's not our reality as men and women, as husbands and wives, as fathers and mothers, if Jesus isn't the preeminent voice in our lives, we will not be able to love our wives and our husbands and our children in a way that they need to be loved. They will be our idol. They will be the things that we serve. And that's a broken way to live. Because let me remind you, it may sound like Jesus is saying, I don't care about Mary, I don't care about my mom, and that's not what he's saying at all, because on the cross with nail-pierced wrists and feet, who was he concerned about? He looked down at his mother Mary, and he looked at his disciple John, and he said, "Woman, behold your son. And son, behold your mother." He committed Mary into John's care. So let's not think for a moment that Jesus did not care about his mother, but he's making an important distinction here. You will either follow me or you will follow the systems of your culture. I will be the preeminent voice in your life, or it will be that of your family, or that of yourself. And you can't follow me if you love something above me. Nowadays we'd say, hate my father and mother, children? Okay. Brothers and sisters, yeah, we're actually kind of at odds right now, so this is kind of easy for me. But remember, at this time, how dare the oldest son deny his family and claim another? How dare he? But let me remind you, Jesus didn't teach these things just for the sake of being offensive. What Jesus taught was the truth. Now, did he say it in a manner, in a time that would have caught a lot of people off guard? Absolutely. But the truth was always spoken in love. So let's examine again what he's saying here. He says, here are my mother and my brothers. The word that Jesus uses for brothers is adelpho or adelphos. It means siblings. And it's used over 230 times in the New Testament. It's the primary word that Jesus uses to describe his relationship with believers. He calls them siblings. He calls us brothers and sisters. Why is that important? Hear me out, because like I said, just as offensive as Jesus' words were during the time that he was on earth, they are just as offensive now. We live in a different culture with different values, but what he is saying is just as offensive. Because he's giving us a framework in which the church is to operate in. He is saying we are a family. I know that we throw that around all the time. Here at Calvary Central, we're a family. And we can talk about being a family day in and day out, but still not look like a family. It can be an idea that's out there in the ether, but we don't actually live it out. But we need to understand that this is Jesus' desire for his body. We are to be a family, and family should not be a word that we just throw around at church. It shouldn't be a word that we use just to cause fuzzy feelings or a quaint impression of how we are to interact. It is who we are at our core. Not acquaintances, not just friends, but family. How does Jesus address God throughout the New Testament? What does he call God? Father. You think that's by accident? Jesus is demonstrating the relationship that we are to have not only with him, not only with God our Father, but with one another. So if we wonder what relationships should look like within our church, within this community, within this group of believers, we should be a family. And just like any family, every member of the family plays a role in the health of that family. A healthy family is one where the children feel safe, where they feel provided for both emotionally and physically, and also spiritually. Spouses can be open and honest with one another. They grow together. They suffer long together. A healthy family is one where there's rest and refreshment, and there's growth, and young men and young women learn what it means to be men of and women of responsibility, of integrity, of honesty, and of selflessness. That's the ideal family, isn't it? But look at the effect that hyper-individualism has had on the family. Talk to any teacher and ask them, what is the common dynamic now in families? It's divorce. It's single-family homes. It's broken families. You know, families are scattered today. As transportation technology has improved and we can travel to anywhere in the world in a matter of hours, job opportunities open up, families spread across the nation. I also want to welcome my sister, Shara, here from Minnesota. Hey, thanks. Thanks for joining us. I told her I was going to give her a hard time. But this isn't to condemn anyone. We are so much more transient than we've ever been. Grandparents have less and less influence in the life of their grandkids. Schedules are so jam-packed that we have a hard time fitting in quality time with one another. Even look at the core family unit. When people sit down to eat, if they sit down to eat, what do we have out most of the time? Phones. You sit down at night, and we don't even watch the same screen together anymore. It used to be we come home and at least we watch TV together, but you got the TV on and everybody's got their devices on. So we're in the same room, but we're not even conscious with each other. Because the family unit is broken down. And again, that's not to condemn any individual here. That is the society that we live in today. And we need to just be hyper aware that the enemy is working in the midst of all of that. So when Jesus says, hey guys, you're supposed to be a family, we need to understand that we live in a culture that is uncomfortable with that reality. Look at how that kind of individualistic thinking has impacted the family of God. Think about church. When you go looking for a church, what are you looking for? A place that meets your needs. Rarely do we say, where am I needed? Where can I serve? Where can I use my gifts? Where am I needed? God, where do you want me? We are instead asking, where can my needs be met? I'm looking for this kind of group, this kind of worship, this kind of pastor, this kind of V-neck. We're looking for very specific things instead of asking, where can I be used? Now, even when we're within a church, when we're deciding whether or not to attend a Bible study or to serve in a specific area, the first thing we consider is, what will I get out of it? What's the Bible study on? What book are they covering? That doesn't really interest me. I'm not going to go. Instead of asking, who can I be a blessing to? Who will I benefit if I'm involved in this group? Then look at attendance at church all over the U.S. It's sporadic. And it's the same in any church. Church attendance is once a month, maybe twice a month. Because we don't view this as family. We view this gathering as, what am I going to get out of it? And if something comes along that seems to be more interesting or more fun or more necessary, we will skip church for that thing because it's not family. Do I feel like going this morning, or do I have something better to do? Rarely do we wake up and say, man, who needs me there? Whose life do I play a role in that I can benefit? See, we are on stage and we are the lead role in our life. And that's Western thinking at its core. It's me and mine and nothing else. And that is contrary to the teachings and the will and the desire of Jesus Christ and his church. Again, I'm not trying to condemn anyone. I'm impacted by this way of thinking, but we need to be aware of the world we are living in, because Paul warns us in Romans 12:2, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. What does it mean to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus? What does it mean to stay rooted in the person of Jesus Christ? It means that his teachings are preeminent over all other teachings. So when he describes who we are in him, that's who we are, not who the world says we are. When he describes what church is, that is what church is, not what the world says church is. But then we'll say, well, Christians are hypocrites. I don't want to be around hypocrites. I've been hurt by the church. People at church are weird. You know what I'd say to you? Welcome to the family. We are so hard on others without realizing that we're just as broken as everyone else. And families spend time together. This idea of Lone Ranger Christianity is so played out, and it's so wrong. I don't need to go to church to be a Christian. That may be true, but that wasn't Jesus' design for you. It's just not biblical. We are a family. We all lend a hand. We all share responsibility. We all pull together to help when there's someone in need. We eat together. We play together. We weep with one another. We rejoice with one another. And we learn and we grow together. We hurt together and we heal together. And we don't bail when things get hard. Millennials, do you hear me? And I'm your elder millennial. I'm at that cutoff. I'm part of that crowd. We don't bail when things get hard, because that's what a family does. You know, there was a recent study done. They were trying to find out why some people make it through trauma and are even better than they were before, and why some people just never seem to overcome it. All kinds of different trauma. And there was this assumption that they went into with trauma, that they thought that it had to do with the type of trauma. If the trauma that you experienced was kind of a socially, not something people talked about much. If it was maybe taboo in some circles, they thought maybe it was that kind of trauma that people wouldn't rise up and out of. But they found out they were completely wrong. When they looked at people that recovered from trauma and were even better on the other side of it, it had nothing to do with the type of trauma that they experienced. And it had everything to do with whether or not they had a loving, supporting community around them. That's what it came down to. Regardless of the trauma, did they have a loving, supporting community that they were surrounded by? Satan wants to isolate. When did Satan come to Jesus? When he was isolated in the desert. You know, loneliness today is an epidemic. Physicians are saying that it's loneliness, not diabetes, not cancer, but loneliness that is the biggest danger to humanity today. Because loneliness will lead to all of those other things. Guys, we were created for community, and I know that's a buzzword today, but let's listen to the words of Jesus. You are my brothers and my sisters. Anything short of that is not the true church. If you are not part of a church family, find a God-fearing, Bible-teaching group of imperfect believers and get involved. And don't be surprised when they're imperfect, because so are you. And stick it out. Stick it out. How many of you have been part of Central for more than 20 years? Get those hands up high. Man, that's a lot of you. How many of you have been offended here? Come on, you liars. Get it up high. Have been offended. There you go. Guess what? We had to get over it, didn't we? Because we're family. And that's what we do. And we learn together, and we love together, we forgive, we hurt together. And that's what Jesus intended. Now, Jesus said something else in this statement that is controversial, that is really easy to miss if we're not careful. Who's part of this family? Remember, he's talking to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes, the religious elite, when if you were to ask them, are you part of God's family? You bet we are. But if you were to ask them why, what would they say? What makes you a part of the family of God? Because I am Jewish. Because my father is Abraham. I was born into the family of God. But then Jesus says, for whoever, verse 50, for whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. He says it has nothing to do with bloodlines and everything to do with whoever does the will of my Father. That's the statement, that's the word that's going to get Jesus killed. Whoever. Because right before he's crucified, we read in Mark 11:15 that he came to Jerusalem, and Jesus went into the temple and began to drive out those who bought and sold in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he would not allow anyone to carry wares through the temple. Then he taught, saying to them, and this is from the words of Isaiah, it is not written, my house, is it not, no, Important differentiation here. Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations? But you have made it a den of thieves. And the scribes and chief priests heard it and sought how they might destroy him, for they feared him, because all the people were astonished at his teaching. The Jews believed salvation was in their bloodline, but Jesus taught that it was whoever, all races, all creeds, all nations, simply whoever did the will of the Father, that's the family of God. And just to make sure there was no confusion, in John 8:37, he spoke to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and he says, I know that you are Abraham's descendants. I know your nationality. But it's interesting because you still try to kill me, because my word has no place in you. I speak what I have seen with my father, and you do what you have seen with your father. They answered and said to him, well, Abraham is our father. And Jesus said to them, if you were Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham. But now you seek to kill me, a man who has told you the truth, which I heard from God. Abraham did not do this. You do the deeds of your father. Then they said to him, we were not born of fornication. We have one Father, and that Father is who? God. We are of the family of God. But Jesus said to them, if God were your Father, you would love me. For I proceeded forth and came from God. Nor have I come of myself, but he sent me. Why do you not understand my speech? Because you are not able to listen to my word. You are of your father, the devil. And the desires of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it. There's the war right there. The battle between truth and lies. And it's the battle that we face daily. Jesus tells them salvation is available to all nations. Whoever does the will of my Father, they will be a part of the family of God. And it is the will of my Father to save those who will believe on my name. That's his will. It is his will for all men and women to be saved. And to be saved, you must believe in me. Not believe in the historical existence of me, but put your faith and trust in me. Pledge your allegiance to me. And that's how you become a member of the family of God. See, Jesus' teachings, they were radical. And they're still radical today. They were radical at his time because the family unit was the most important relationship in your life. And Jesus said, I need to be more important than that relationship. I need to be more important than your family if you're truly going to follow me. But now he says into our culture, I need to be more important than yourself. Your needs, your wants, your desires, your flesh, the things that you think are important, the way that you view church, the way that you view family, the way that you view sexuality, all these views that you've put together and made for your own hodgepodge of truth. My truth is more important than that. In this world where it's a choose your own adventure, where we decide what parts of this are true and what parts are not based on our own wants and our own desires. Jesus says that doesn't work if you're going to be my follower. You want to be a lone ranger. You want to build your theology based on the podcasts that you agree with and the blogs that you agree with. Guess what? We live in a day and age where if you want to believe something, you will find someone who is teaching that thing. You will find someone who will reinforce that belief. There's probably a Netflix documentary on it. And you'll shake your head the whole time. That's what I believe. That's it. They got it right. But guys, in the midst of all that, this is our anchor. And guys, these aren't just archaic stories. This is the living, breathing Word of God. And Jesus says, I am the Word. So let's just be aware that there will be a temptation in our culture to serve self above all else, but that it is not the teachings of Jesus Christ. He's calling us to be a family.